The $20,000 trap? Why banks don't want you to hold this much cash. There's a transaction that happens every single day in America that almost nobody thinks about twice. Someone checks their bank balance on a Sunday night. The number is lower than they expected. A pending charge they forgot about. A bill that hit early. And somewhere in the background, a fee, $35, quietly posts to their account for the privilege of going negative by $11. The bank didn't call, didn't ask. The system just ran. Now here's the thing nobody explains about that $35. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It was the output of a model, a profitability model, that your bank runs on every account it holds. And that model has a very specific idea of what kind of customer it wants you to be. Not broke. Broke people can't pay anything at all. Not wealthy. Wealthy people barely touch retail banking. They have private bankers, brokerage accounts, treasury ladders. They interact with a checking account only when strictly necessary. The ideal customer, the one that drives quarterly earnings in the consumer division, is someone productive enough to keep earning and stretched enough to keep needing. The bridge. Here's the analogy I want you to carry through this entire video. Think of your bank as a toll road, not a modern government highway with public accountability and posted signs. The old kind, 1800s. A private company owned the only bridge over the river, and they charged whatever they wanted because your alternative was swimming. The toll road operator didn't need you wealthy, didn't need you to fail completely either. He needed you almost okay, productive enough to keep earning, stretched enough to keep showing up every month, like clockwork, and paying. There is a Federal Reserve working paper from 2023 that classifies American households along a spectrum, from financially fragile to financially resilient. The cutoff the economists use isn't $50,000. It isn't $30,000. It's $20,000 in liquid savings. And here's the part that doesn't make the headlines. Banks run internal account profitability models, and those models have a name for customers below that line. They call them high engagement accounts. Translated from corporate, these are the people we charge the most. $20,000 is the specific number that breaks that model, not because it makes you rich, because it builds you another road. And the moment you have another road, the toll operator loses his pricing power over you, permanently. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how that pricing power works. 5 specific mechanisms, each one engineered with more precision than most people realize. And then I'll show you what happens, in real dollar terms, the moment that power shifts. Because the math on the other side of $20,000 doesn't just look different. It runs different. Let's talk about how the model actually works. Because it isn't one mechanism. It's 5, stacked on top of each other, each one calibrated to land at exactly the wrong moment. Layer 1. Overdraft fees. In 2022, American banks collected $7.7 billion in overdraft and non-sufficient funds fees from one product in 1 year. But the number that should actually stop you isn't the total, it's the distribution. 9% of account holders paid 79% of all overdraft fees. The bank was not casting a wide net. It was targeting a specific financial stress level with surgical precision. And the tool it used wasn't random. Banks run transaction ordering algorithms, and when multiple charges are pending against a low balance, some institutions have been caught processing the largest transaction first. Not the earliest one, the largest one, which causes the maximum number of smaller pending items to also overdraft, rather than just one. Wells Fargo paid $1.4 billion settling a class action suit over exactly this practice. That wasn't a glitch. That was a decision made in a product meeting. When you hold $20,000 in savings, you never overdraft. Not once. The algorithm has no entry point into your life. The toll booth simply isn't on your route. Layer 2. Credit card interest. Federal Reserve data for 2024 shows the average American household carrying credit card debt paid approximately $1,300 in annual interest. compounding at somewhere between 22 and 29% APR, which is where most major cards sit right now. The people paying that interest are overwhelmingly people without a savings buffer. Not because they're irresponsible, because without a buffer, the credit card becomes the emergency fund by default. Car breaks down, the card absorbs it. Medical bill arrives, the card takes it. And once an emergency lands on the card, you can't zero the balance at month's end. The emergency already consumed next month's surplus. The balance stays. And at 24%, a balance stays with tremendous enthusiasm. The credit card industry has a name for people who carry revolving balances and pay regular interest. They call them revolvers. And they have a name for people who pay in full every month and generate zero interest revenue. They call them deadbeats. That word appears in trade publications, industry conference presentations, internal documents. The person who uses the product, collects the rewards, and refuses to be profitable is a deadbeat. That should be your stated goal. Layer 3. Account maintenance fees. The average monthly maintenance fee on a checking account runs around $15, waived if you maintain a minimum balance, typically between $1,500 and $5,000 depending on the institution. Here's the mechanism. If you're building savings from a low starting point and you have one bad month, irregular paycheck, unexpected bill, your balance dips below the threshold. $15, right when you can least afford it. Not a penalty for irresponsibility, a fee for being financially vulnerable at a specific moment. The timing isn't coincidental. It's calibrated. Layer 4. The desperation premium. A National Bureau of Economic Research working paper found that borrowers under measurable financial stress pay between 1 and 2 percentage points more on loan products than financially stable borrowers with comparable credit scores. Same credit profile, different negotiating position. On a $30,000 car loan over 60 months, 2 extra percentage points cost you approximately $1,600. Not because you're a worse borrower, because the lender sensed you weren't in a position to walk away. And lenders can sense it. Every time. When you have $20,000 in savings, you have a second bridge. The moment the lender knows you have a second bridge, the price on the first one drops. Not because you became more creditworthy, because you became less captive. Layer 5. The cognitive tax. This one never appears on your bank statement. It may be the most expensive of all. A paper published in Science in 2013, Mulanathan and Schaffer, Harvard and Princeton, measured the cognitive impact of financial stress by administering identical logic and reasoning tests under high and low stress conditions. The result: financial anxiety impaired performance by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. For context, one full night without sleep impairs cognitive function by approximately 8 points. Chronic financial stress is more cognitively damaging than sleep deprivation. And unlike sleep deprivation, it doesn't resolve after a good night. It runs in the background. Every single day. What this means in practice: people under financial stress are more susceptible to impulsive purchases, more likely to accept worse deal terms, more responsive to scarcity-based marketing, limited time offer while supplies last, because scarcity messaging hits differently when you're already living in a scarcity state. The companies extracting money from financially stressed people didn't cause the stress. They priced their products knowing it was there. The distinction is worth noting. The outcome doesn't change. $20,000 is approximately the threshold at which this chronic low-grade cognitive drain becomes manageable. Not eliminated. Manageable. The 13 points return. And with them comes something that changes every financial decision you make from that point forward. The ability to slow down, compare options, and think about next year instead of next Tuesday. 5 layers. Each one engineered. Each one self-reinforcing. Each one feeding the next. And every dollar extracted through those 5 layers is a dollar that doesn't go toward the number that would make all 5 of them structurally impossible. The toll road is self-maintaining, not through grand design, through incentive alignment. Nobody had to plan this consciously. They built products that were profitable, set them as defaults, and the math sustained itself, reliably, for decades. You think the problem is the fees. The actual problem is the absence of the number that makes the fees irrelevant. Let's talk about Ryan. Ryan is 34. He earns $68,000 a year after taxes, roughly $4,400 a month in take-home pay. Fixed expenses run about $3,200. Food and gas add another $500. On a good month, he clears $700. On a bad month, he breaks even. He currently has $4,000 in savings, which has been approximately $4,000 for 2 years. Not because Ryan is undisciplined. Every time he builds progress, something consumes it. Car repair, medical copay. The buffer never gets a chance to become a buffer. So Ryan does one structural thing differently. He opens a high-yield savings account at a separate institution, different app, different login. He sets up an automatic $500 transfer on the exact day his paycheck lands, before he has any chance to mentally allocate it elsewhere. The separation is intentional. Savings one tap away in the same app as checking creates almost no barrier to spending them under stress. A separate institution with a 2 to 3 day transfer creates exactly enough friction to pause. Month 12. Ryan sits at $9,800. Net of a $1,200 emergency car repair he rebuilt over 3 months. He was not perfect. The system didn't require him to be. Month 20. Ryan crosses $20,000. Here's what changes. His credit card utilization, running at 42% because cards were his buffer between paychecks, drops to 9%. His credit score rises 31 points in 60 days. He refinances his car loan. The rate drops 1.9 points, saving $1,240 from one phone call. He switches his car insurance to a higher deductible, since he can actually cover it now. Premium drops $732 a year. He didn't change his driving behavior. He changed his financial posture. The posture changed the price. 6 months after crossing the threshold, Ryan is saving $850 a month instead of $500. He did not get a raise. The leverage of the number did the work. Now, there's a second version of this shift that has nothing to do with bank statements. Think about the last negotiation you walked into under genuine time pressure. A car you needed by a deadline. An apartment you had to commit to before someone else did. In all of those, your leverage was close to zero. You took what was offered. Behavioral economists call what changes at $20,000 outside option value. A credible exit, not a theoretical one, raises the value of every negotiation you're inside. Not because you become confrontational, because the other party can sense you're not trapped. Desperation is visible, so is its absence. The critical word is credible. Below $20,000, I could walk away is a bluff, and the other party usually knows it. Above $20,000, the option is real. Consider this. A woman in marketing for 8 years, under a manager who took credit for her work and passed her over for 2 earned promotions. She filed nothing, said nothing, kept showing up. Not from lack of awareness. Because she had $6,000 in savings, a mortgage, a kid in daycare, and the math didn't support any other conclusion. Her manager's leverage wasn't formal. It was just knowing she couldn't afford to test him. Then she inherited $18,000. Within 90 days, 3 applications, 2 offers, resignation. The counter-offer, 23% above her salary. She declined, because the new role was better. None of this required a different version of her. She became non-desperate. And non-desperation, it turns out, is worth roughly 23% of your salary. $20,000 doesn't make you wealthy. It makes your yes optional. That is the actual value of the threshold, not safety. Leverage. Here's something the banking industry would prefer not to explain clearly. The customer above $20,000 is worth more over a lifetime than the one below it generating fees. The bank knows this. But the system was optimized for quarterly earnings, not lifetime value. And quarterly earnings came from fee revenue, extracted monthly from the highest engagement accounts. A former branch manager in Ohio once told me, "We track customers by contribution margin, and the highest margin ones were almost never the wealthiest. They were the ones with just enough to keep needing us." Starting around 2021, regulatory pressure escalated, and several major banks began voluntarily cutting overdraft fees. The branches that had quietly run higher average savings balances suddenly looked exceptional. Same customers, same deposits, same referrals, just structured differently. Spread over decades instead of extracted monthly. The toll road eventually discovered its most profitable outcome wasn't the toll. It was the customers who built their own bridges, crossed over, and kept living nearby. Here is the sequence. Step 1. Build to $20,000 in a high-yield savings account at a separate institution. In early 2026, a competitive account pays 4 to 5% annually versus roughly 0.2% at most primary banks. On $20,000, that's the difference between $940 in interest and $40. $900 loss to nothing but inertia. Step 2. Every dollar above $20,000 goes into a low-cost index fund, not actively managed. An advisor who told you exactly this, get to $20,000, index the rest, leave it alone, would have nothing to charge you next quarter. So that advice rarely gets delivered. What gets delivered instead is complexity, justifying fees on a portfolio that would compound better without the intervention. The S&P 500 has averaged roughly 10% annually over 30 years. $100,000 invested at 35, left alone until 65, becomes approximately $1,749,000. Not from genius, from patience and compounding. And genuine patience is only available once you've crossed $20,000 and stopped fearing the next emergency. The challenge is entirely behavioral. So, 3 things to do this week. First, calculate your bank extraction rate for the last 12 months. Every overdraft fee, every maintenance fee, every dollar of credit card interest, every premium paid for weak negotiating position. For most people below $20,000, this lands between $1,200 and $3,000 a year. Write it down. It's the direct cost of the gap. Second, open a high-yield savings account at a different institution. Auto-transfer on payday before you see the money. The system doesn't need you perfect. It needs you consistent. Third, calculate your outside option value. If your income vanished tomorrow, how many months could you survive without borrowing? Fewer than 3, and every negotiation you enter, your review, your lease, your tolerance for a bad situation at work, runs on a bluff. $20,000 is roughly 3 to 4 months of runway for most households. That converts the bluff into a real hand. The toll road is still out there. Patient, fully optimized, running the same model it has for decades. Your job is simple. Build the bridge, cross it exactly once, and never think about the toll again.